wanted to ask Ralph Hallow to start us off. And Ralph, the issue is very simple. Right now, as we look at the presidential election, we see a Republican electorate that is not excited about their frontrunner, but 75% of Republican voters think that Mitt Romney will be the nominee. How do you see this playing out?
The political landscape is littered with imponderables and improbables and unknowables far later than in the contest than it usually is. And I hate to say this at a conservative political action conference, but none of the signs that I see are particularly good. Intensity has gone from usually it's with Republicans. The polling I've seen shows that intensity or enthusiasm about voting is now with the Democrats. I regard that as a very bad sign. The enthusiasm among Republican voters for any of the candidates is dangerously low. So that if you have, no matter who you have win this, and you'd have to be an extreme partisan to believe it's not going to be Mitt Romney. He just has the money to get the job done, to go all the way to the end zone. That is for the nomination. But none of these folks has the enthusiasm, generates the enthusiasm needed in November to bring more Republican voting independents and Republican activists and so on to the polls. It's the same story, it seems to me, that the Republican Party has had every time. I hope this is not taken as a criticism of any of the candidates or of the Republican Party, but every time the Republican Party puts up a candidate who is not conservative, it has lost the election. If I'm wrong on that, I'd like some data.
Well, Eric, you have been notable in your expression of dissatisfaction with the field. How did we get to this point, and what does it really mean?
You know, the left blames George Bush for a lot of things that he's not to blame for. I actually blame Bush for this. Just follow along here. Every president generally has an heir apparent when they leave office. George Bush had Dick Cheney for vice president, who did not want to run. And typically what the base of the parties do, either Democrat or Republican, is they have a referendum on that president's legacy by either choosing their heir apparent or someone else. Because he left a void there, we went all the way back to 2000 and started over again, a lot of us having some of the same fights we've had. And we're now at the situation where all the candidates, including Romney to a degree, are a bit of a victim of this void that was left by not having an heir. I think the Republican Party has yet to reset itself from the Bush years to be able to move forward.
Ralph, on this intensity issue, has the Obama administration helped the Republican Party in general? And more specifically, is this recent issue about the contraception mandate going to provide some of the intensity for Republicans and conservatives?
Well, I think that whoever ends up being the Republican nominee, and I would guess take issue a little bit with my fellow Ralph on the panel and say that I've worked on every presidential campaign since 1980. I was 4 years old. And this is the most wide open, the most fluid, the most topsy-turvy. I mean, think about this for a minute. There have been 8 contests so far, and the front runner has won 3 of them. And you've had 3 different winners, and sitting where we are today with the change in the party rules so that the delegates are awarded proportionally for the most part. I realize that later California, a lot of states in the Northeast are going to be winner take all. Really, I would have said that the day of the convention deciding the nomination was over and was settled by the rise of the primary. I'm not sure that will be the case in 2012, and I would say that whoever emerges from this process, whether it's Romney or somebody else, is going to be a better, a more disciplined, a tougher candidate when they have to stand on a stage with Barack Obama. Remember that 4 years ago, when Barack Obama had to go 12 rounds with Hillary Clinton, and what was true in '92 when Bill said, you know, you buy one, you get two, that was true in 2008 for Obama as well. He didn't just take on Hillary. He took on Hillary, Bill, and the entire Clinton machine. He could have never won the general by the margin he did without first earning his spurs beating them. And on this issue, Scott, which is the religious liberty issue, and this administration's edict that every Catholic hospital in America, and by the way, 1 out of every 6 patients in the United States is in a bed in a Catholic hospital. 90% of all the homeless shelters in America are operated by a church, a synagogue, or another house of worship. 1 out of every 10 Americans below the poverty level in America, which is about 57 million Americans, is a client of Catholic Charities, just Catholic Charities. That doesn't include the Southern Baptist Convention. It doesn't include the other denominations. And for them to be told that they have to choose between violating their conscience or providing health care to their employers shows not just an insensitivity to, but an outright hostility by this president to religion and to the religious values of millions of Americans.
You know, on that point,
Beyond that, I have no opinion on the matter.
The President of the United States has done something that Jesus himself could not do. He has united Muslims, Jews, Catholics, Orthodox, and Southern Baptists all together in opposition to him. It's striking. He really is. George Bush was wrong. Obama's the uniter, not the divider.
Well, and let's put some numbers to this. In 2008, Barack Obama won 54% of the Catholic vote. This morning, Barack Obama gets a 39% job approval rating from Catholics, so he's down 15 points.
Yeah, and Scott, is that your data?
Yes.
Okay, that's your data. Add to that the Pew Research data that shows that in 2008, this is party ID, 49% of Catholics said they were Democrats, 41% said they were Republicans. In '08. Today, it's 49% Republican, 42% Democrat, a 15-point swing. Now, those Catholic ethnic voters are going to be the swing vote that will decide Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Pennsylvania, Florida, just about every battleground
state. Yeah, but what
state.
makes you think they will come out just because of what Obama did on this one issue? Yeah, there's been a shift, but what about, back to intensity, what about feeling that they've got to vote in November or else something bad happens as far as they're concerned?
Well, I think what it does is it gives the lie to Obama's argument that Obamacare as passed posed no threat to the deeply held moral beliefs of religious Americans.
Oh,
and it also gives the lie to the abortion carve-out that he did by executive order. But Ralph, I do agree with you on this. It isn't going to be enough to just be anti-Obama. Whether it's Romney or Santorum or Gingrich or whoever it is, we have to have a forward-leaning, positive, conservative reform agenda that will excite and energize the grassroots.
Now, I want to shift gears. I want to shift gears, though, for a second. We've only got a little bit of time to cover the entire landscape. We're talking about some of the issues, but every bit of polling shows that the economy is the top issue driving election 2012. Before Lehman Brothers collapsed, 43% of Americans said their finances were in good shape. When President Obama took office, it had already fallen to 35%. By last summer, it was down to 27%, and the president's ratings were tanking. Right now, 35% say their finances are in good shape, exactly the same as the day that President Obama took office. If that number keeps moving up, if people feel better about the economy, is President Obama a lock to win? Ralph?
I think it's a lot harder, but I don't think that'll be the case. You've still got almost 1 million more people out of work today than when he took the oath of office. Okay. Historically, and Scott, I know you know this, no one in the post-World War II period has been reelected as president in the year in which real personal income declined. And right now that number is down, it's not up. So it's not just the single unemployment number, it's whether or not people feel like they've got money in their pocket.
Eric, do you think it's more than the economy?
I think the race should be more than the economy. Unfortunately, I think the Republicans have decided that they're going to go with electability instead of issues. And if electability is your case, and the electability is based on I can fix the economy and the economy fixes itself, then why do we necessarily need a nominee who the Obama campaign is going to spend millions and millions of dollars on to make unlikable? There needs to be something more to it. Ralph is right. We have to have more of an agenda. But also, I think the Republicans have dropped the ball on telling the story about Barack Obama. They never have. They always thought that they could use the economy. There's a story to be told about Barack Obama. This is a man who, if you want to succeed in his America, you have to be on board his campaign. He picks the winners and losers, not the free market. And there's a story to be told there that resonates, I think, with people in the country. I just think the Republicans are dropping the ball. I hate to be pessimistic about an election. We should win. But it seems like we are setting ourselves up to lose if the economy improves. And we should be able to beat a man who, to succeed in his society, he must pick you as a winner.
Okay. Ralph?
Unless the Republican, all of these figures are interesting and they'll go back and forth, and we don't know which one will be the ascendant ones and the ones that make a difference in November. But this much, I believe, is true. Unless the nominee has a message, a simple message that he can get out in 3 sentences, I don't think we have a chance, or Republicans have a chance. I don't know that every conservative here thinks of himself as a Republican, but if you think of the Republican Party as the repository, the only available repository of your philosophical beliefs, then the problem is you don't have any candidates. So far, it was demonstrated the ability to get a message. Why are any of these, with the exception of Ron Paul, why are any of these candidates running? What is it that they're going to do to change America? My God, the agenda of the leading candidate, the richest candidate, the presumed nominee, is 40 pages long. This is not how you do it. The problem is, unless you have a core belief or a core set of beliefs, and you would call that conservatism, that's what you'd like to see. Unless you really feel that, it's hard to come up with 2 or 3 things the way Reagan did. When Reagan did it right, and that's going to be necessary again this time, because I think the playing field right now and in November will belong to Obama. He will have more money even than Romney. He will have the incumbency. These are 2 big, big advantages.
Hey, Ralph, let's move beyond the White House for a little bit. What about the House and the Senate in 2012? Is that looking as bleak as Ralph is painting for the presidency?
Well, first of all, again, I don't want to belabor the point, but I don't think it's as bleak as Ralph is making it sound, number one. I think if you look at, I think the Gallup poll last week or week before last of the top 12 battlegrounds, at that moment, Romney was beating Obama by a point, okay? And that's before the nomination has been resolved. And usually you're stronger after the nomination than pre. Now keep in mind, at that moment, Romney's acting as a surrogate for the pollster for a generic Republican. Secondly, no Democrat has been elected president since the founding of the Republic, not in the 20th century, not since the Civil War, in the history of the United States, without carrying at least 3 southern states. Obama carried Virginia, North Carolina, and Florida. I don't think he'll carry one of those states in 2012. Now, in terms of the House and Senate, I'm relatively optimistic the House will be held, and I'll tell you why. No incumbent president has gained more than 15 seats in a re-elect since World War II, with one exception, and that was Lyndon Johnson in 1964. And in a lot of ways, that doesn't really count because it wasn't really Johnson's re-elect. Right. So usually, if you're going to have a wave in the House, it's Reagan 80. It's Obama 08 when he picked up 30 seats. It's not the re-elect. Even Reagan, carrying 49 states and 59% of the vote, even he only picked up 15 House seats in 1984. Now, if you turn to the Senate, I think the picture is potentially better. Again, 9 months out, a lot of things could change, but Bob Kerrey bailed out of the Nebraska Senate race this week. That seat is gone. So now you're at 48, assuming North Dakota goes Republican, and it certainly should. That gets you to 49. At that point, to get to 51, you would have to win 2 of Montana, New Mexico, Missouri, Florida, Ohio, and Virginia. And then Scott Brown has to be reelected in Massachusetts. And I like our chances.
Eric, a couple of different times I have said that the scariest possible outcome in 2016 would be for the Republicans to win the White House, both branches of Congress, and not bring about any significant change. Is that an absurd scenario?
No, I'm afraid that may be where we're headed if the Republicans win, an unwillingness, an inability to affect change. When you look at voters, forget registered voters, forget the general public, look at people who are likely to vote. People who are likely to vote are expecting real change. You know, Congress has an 11% approval rating. Congress has a bad approval rating among Republicans. Do you know why Congress has a bad approval rating among Republicans? Because the Tea Party sent them to Congress to effect change, and they've seen them raise the debt ceiling. They've seen them compromise on spending with Barack Obama. They've seen them even now with this highway bill. As much as the Democrats want more spending, you've got a lot of Republicans mad at Republicans in Congress for spending too much. People across the board, regardless of party, want some fundamental changes in the country. I've got to tell you, putting 2010 in perspective, you have to go back to the 1800s to find an election of that scale when you take into account not just federal races, but state, county, and municipal races in this country. There are cities in North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, where they used to be all Democrat. You can't find a Democrat in that county anymore after 2010. They all became Republican. Now, the danger in 2012 is if we run with electability instead of big ideas for reform, and then suddenly the top of the ticket doesn't look that electable, you're going to have a lot of people running away from the ticket who have poured money in there and don't have money to pour into state races, gubernatorial races, Senate and House races. We can't just focus on the White House. We've got to focus on the House, the Senate, governors, and state legislatures. We would be nowhere on the Obamacare decision without a concerted effort by conservatives to elect attorneys general in the 50 states.
Yeah.
Aren't there super PACs, though, that have been formed by Gillespie and others that address the House and Senate funding? And what would a bad turnout mean for those super PACs?
I think a bad turnout in 2012 would actually hurt us in a number of the swing states. Remember, this is the first redistricting that the Democrats have ever controlled. Since the passage of the Voting Rights Act in the 1960s, the Republicans have controlled the Department of Justice for every census redistricting. This is the first time the Democrats have ever done it since the Voting Rights Act was passed. So they've tried to pull back possible Republican gains in the legislative races. They have tried to put Republicans in tighter districts. We've got to have a good turnout in November to get these people elected.
Is it possible, and this is for either Ralph, is it possible for the Republican presidential nominee to not be the leader of the conservative movement in the country?
Yeah, of course it is.
Okay, what happens if that happens? What does that look like?
Well, nobody knows the future, but I'll tell you what I've observed on, as long as I've been on this planet, it means suicide for the Republican Party.
Ralph, you agree on this one?
Well, I would certainly agree it's not the best scenario. But I guess what I would say is, speaking as somebody who's been involved in the conservative movement since the late 70s, that we've spent most of our time on this panel doing what probably a lot of us are doing during breaks and sitting around at coffee klatches, and you sort of sit around and say, well, Boehner ought to be doing this, and McConnell ought to be doing that, and Romney or Newt ought to be saying this, and those are all true, okay? We need our leaders to plant their feet in concrete and take a stand, not just in season, but out of season. But having said that, I also want to put the monkey on our back a little bit. I like what Newt says when he says, I'm not asking you to be for me, I'm asking you to be with me. Because when you look at what we're going to face, which is $1 billion, the labor unions, President of the United States flying around in Air Force One with every special interest in this country in his back pocket, and the meanest, toughest, most vicious political team we have ever faced. And that's saying a lot. When you look at what that is going to look like, it's not just on the nominee's back, it's on our back. It's our responsibility. How many people in this room are active in or have attended a Tea Party event in the last 2 years? All right? Now let me ask you a question. What Republican politician made that happen? Not one. We made it happen on Facebook and on social networking from the bottom up. And
But Ralph,
if
MSNBC told us it was the Koch brothers who made it happen.
Well, I know you'll hear that on MSNBC or, as you say, another network, but it's not true. So what I'm saying is, whoever the nominee is, let's not just think of ourselves as passive and as them being the ones to have to make the case. Let's go out there and turn out the biggest conservative vote in a presidential election in modern political history, and let's send Barack Obama in a U-Haul it back to Chicago where he belongs.
Barry, other than the desire to beat Barack Obama and a message about the economy, what is the key for conservatives and Republicans? We've got just a quick moment for each of you to offer that.
Real quick, I think whoever the nominee is, and I don't know who it's going to be, I like Rick Santorum's message. If his candidacy, if Rick's candidacy could be summed up in a sentence, it would be this. If you want to restore America's economic strength, you must first restore America's marriages and families and homes. Because if you graduate from high school, you get a job, any job, and you get married and you stay married, and you don't have children until you are married, you have an infinitesimal chance of being in poverty. And our vision as conservatives for a strong, a renewed, and a resurgent America is not just America that's back at work, although that's important. And it's not just an America with a balanced budget. It's an America with vibrant communities, religious and charitable institutions, and strong marriages and
Why
families.
is that different
and we
from
need
Mitt
our nominee
Romney?
to make that case.
Why is that different from Mitt Romney's message, from Newt Gingrich's message, or from Ron Paul's message?
Well,
aren't they all exactly where?
I think Romney is starting to get there, but he's primarily run as an economic turnaround artist, and I think he has that. That's in his wheelhouse. But I think I was glad to see him in Colorado last week start to talk about this religious liberty issue, and he needs to do more of it.
Eric, what do we need?
I would take us back to the very first Republican presidential campaign. It was not Abraham Lincoln. It was actually 1856, John C. Fremont. But Lincoln set the tone for that campaign. He went up to Kalamazoo, Michigan, talked to a huge crowd of people. He said the nation at the time was 80 years old, and that already we were the envy of the world, and how was it possible? And Lincoln said he had thought about it, and the reason we were the envy of the world was because in this country, unlike any other on earth, every man can make himself. That was his line, every man can make himself. In Barack Obama's America, that's no longer true. The government makes you for you. And I think all of the campaigns, all of the Republican presidential candidates, the choice is between you setting your own agenda or Barack Obama setting it for you.
I think the one thing that we all need to keep in mind too, every bit of polling data and every bit of policy data suggests that America's best days are still to come. Things may get worse before they get better, and the policy discussions may not go every time the way you want. The elections may not go every time that you want. But this nation still has an incredibly bright future because the American people still believe, 81% believe that we're all endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, including the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I'd like to thank Ralph Reed, Ralph Hallow, and Eric Erickson.